Hi there, this is Jermaine Kibiru and welcome to pianoplaying.blogspot.com. I'm very excited to be back with you guys for another lesson. This time we're going to look at the tritone. It is a very popular movement and I think that we're going to have lots of fun with this movement. We're going to break this lesson up into three parts. Firstly, we're going to look at the construction of the tritone. Secondly, we're going to look at how to practice the tritone, and then thirdly and most importantly, how can you incorporate the tritone into your style of playing. Now this is mainly aimed for the gospel musician, and for that style I'm not going to look at the blues or the jazz versions of or genres where tritones are also very common, but we're only going to stick to the gospel genre in this instance. So we're going to be in the key of A flat, and let's get started. Look at the number system and the scale. A flat is your 1, B flat is your 2, C is your 3, D flat is your 4, E flat is your 5, F is your 6, G is your 7, and then we're back at the 1, which is A flat. Okay, so last time when we looked at the major 7th chord, right, we saw that to form or to play a major 7th chord, you make use of the 1, the 3, the 5, and then the 7, right? Now the tritone gets derived from the dominant 7th or the 7th chord, meaning that you flat that 7 down and you bring it to G flat in this instance. So that would be an A flat 7th chord or an A flat dominant chord, right? So the tritone makes use of 2 notes within the chord, which is the 3rd and that flat 7 over there. Okay, so if you're playing an A flat bass note, the easiest way for you to look at this is go to the 3rd and the flat 7, and that would be the tritone that you can play over the A flat bass. Okay, the second way, and this is the way that I actually used to start out with before I understood about the dominant 7th chord. The second way was just to go a whole step down from the bass note, right, and formulate your tritone like that, right? Now the good thing about the tritone is that the flat 7th note is exactly in the middle of that chord, right? Which means that you can either play the tritone with a C on the bottom, which is the 3 and the flat 7, or you can play it as the flat 7 and the 3 on top for that A flat bass, right? So if you want to look at a pattern instead of looking at the technicality of it, you can just look at a whole step down and you play the tritone like that. If that's your bass note, you can just go a whole step down, and that is how you would play a tritone for that specific bass. Another benefit about this is that you have 2 ways of playing that, right? I just showed you that, but you have 2 ways of playing the tritone for an A flat bass, right? So for each bass note, right, there's 12 of those. You have 2 different ways of playing the tritone. You can invert it either way. Now another thing that you will note as you play or as you practice the tritones is that you only have 6 unique tritones, and then you actually invert, and all the rest of the tritones are inverted tritones of the previous ones that you've already played, right? So this one is unique all the way to here, and then you just repeat it, but now it's an inverted form, right? So please take note of that. So that is how you form a tritone. Let's look at another key. Let's look at E, the key of E, right? So the first way would be to look at the 3 and the flat 7. That's the 7 of E, and then you flat the 7 and bring it down. So that would be the tritone for an E bass, right? But remember, you can also bring it down just a whole step down, which is easier, right? So if E is your bass, you just go a whole step down and play the tritone like that. And that is mostly how I identify the tritone, right? So that is how you can formulate a tritone. So that's the part 1. Okay, so now we move on to the second part, where we will look at how to practice the tritone. So as you would have noticed, is that I play this with the left hand, right? Because the tritone is most effective when you can play it with a bass player, right? Now for those that don't use or don't have a bass player, you can still formulate the tritone by, let's say, if we look at that A flat again, right, you can play it like this, right? So you take the tritone, but you break it up and split it with your hands. So you will play the bass note and play that flat 7 over there, and then on the right hand you will play the third, right, like that. So that would be a way that you can practice the tritones if you don't have a bass player. But this is mostly for those that do play with a bass player, where you want to play the left hand tritone, right, in different ways, because why? That makes it sound the way it does, where you can play both notes with the left hand like that, right? So this is a left hand move, so I would suggest just go up and down the keyboard or the piano with your index finger and your pinky, right? But you will also notice that I rotate between the two, my index and my thumb. Okay, so this is something that you will have to figure out. What is more comfortable for you? What works for you? Works for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to play it the same way. Sometimes you will find yourself not playing it exactly the same all the time, right? But it is mostly a left hand move. You can also practice it with your right hand, but you will rarely play this with your right hand. This is mostly a left hand move, okay? So that would be a way that you can practice the tritone. Okay, so now we're at the part that I believe is the most important part, and that is how do you incorporate the tritone into your style of playing, right? So there's a few common chord progressions that gets played a lot, and I thought what better way to illustrate the tritone than by incorporating it in your progressions that you should know. And if you don't know it, this is also a way for you to get to know some of the most common progressions. Now, the progression that we will look at would be in A flat, and it would be the 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, and then the 5, and then the 1. Songs like As the Deer Pants for the Water, or Jesus, you're the center of my joy. All that's good and perfect comes from you, right? So that would be the chord progressions that we will be looking at. And in the chord progressions, we will see where to use the tritone. Now, in most of these progressions, the tritone is used as a passing chord to get to a destination chord. It is really that the tritone would be the destination chord. It is always, in this type of progressions that we're going to look at, it is always a passing chord. So let's look at the first one, which is the 7 to the 3 to the 6. So if we're sitting there, right? Okay, so let's look at that. Okay, that's the first one. So over the 7, which is a G bass. So let's see if we can spot, or if we can actually get the tritone and get some understanding. If you're on a G bass, it is either the 3rd and the flatted 7th of G. That's the 7 of G. So you flat the 7, so it would be B and F. Or, as I said, it would be a whole step down and then that 3rd of G, right? So that's G, that's the 3, and now the flat 7 is on the bottom. And for this case, we will use, for the 7, we will use this version instead of that version, okay? So that's the left hand chord. The right hand chord is just an A major, right? So let's look at the chord all together. For the left hand, it is F and B. For the right hand, it is E, A, and D flat. And then we move to the C, which is the 3, okay? And then now, in this case, for the C bass, we make use of the 3rd, and we flat the 7 there, okay? So now we're not using the flat 7 and the 3rd, we're using the 3rd and the flat 7, okay? So this would be your next chord. So in my left hand over the C bass, I have E and B flat. Right hand is E flat, A flat, and C. And then you go to that 6, which is an F minor 11, or whatever you prefer to play, F minor 9, or just an F minor. Okay, so that would be the first place where you can add the tritone. It is a passing to the 7, 3, and then to get to the 6, right? In normal situation, it is just the 1 to the 7 to that 6, okay? But now you can spice it up by playing the 1 to the 7 as a tritone and a 3 as a tritone passing to get to that 6, and that's how you can incorporate the tritones in the first case. So now we're sitting on that 6 there, which is an F, okay, an F bass. So in order to get to that 5, right, to the 1, before you get to the 5, you can also play a 2 passing, okay, any one of these 2. So let's see again if we can spot the tritone, or see how to formulate the tritone. You're on a B flat, which is the 2, so it would be the 3rd, that's the 7 of B flat, you flat the 7, and that's your tritone right there, right? And then you couple that with this, which is just a C major chord, okay? So let's look at the chord all together. Left hand, it is D and A flat. Right hand, it is C, D, and E, and G, and C, right? Okay, so that was over the 2. Another way that you can play that 2 is like this. Okay, so what you're basically doing, you're taking this chord and you taking it an octave higher by inverting the whole chord. Okay, so let's look at it this time around. Left hand it is A flat and D. Right hand it is G, C, E and G. But you can also play a half step below and then go up. Okay, and then you go to the 5. On the 5 you don't play a tritone, but when you get to the 1, there's different ways that you can play that. So on the 1 you will play the tritone again. Now this was the original tritone that we figured out in the beginning when we looked at this lesson. So that would be either this, okay, which is for the left hand is C and then G flat. Right hand it is B flat, D, F and B flat. Or you can invert the whole chord again. Let's play it like that. Okay, now let's look at that chord. Now we're making use of this flatted 7 and the 3rd of A flat. Okay, so left hand it is G flat and C. Right hand is F, B flat, D and F, right? Or you can play it like this. Okay, this chord you remain the same on the left hand, which is G flat and C. Right hand changes to F, A and C, but you can roll from the G to the A flat to the A. Or you can play this chord, okay, over the A flat, which changes to G flat C. Right hand it is E, G and C. Or you can just play this that we played earlier. Yeah, it's that. And that one you can also play there. Okay, so for the left hand it is G flat and C. Right hand it is F and B flat. And then we go to the 4. Right, now the 4 is a D flat. There you don't play a tritone in the beginning, but if you want to go to the 3, right, it's normally all that's good and perfect. That's what you normally do when you go from the 4 to the, you stay on the 4 and then you go to the 3. Now before you go to that 3, you can substitute this chord, that chord, you can substitute it with a tritone again. Okay, so let's look at that tritone. That's a D flat, so we make use of the 3rd and the flat 7. So for the left hand it is F and B. For the right hand it is E flat, G and B flat, and you can roll that as well. Okay, or you can play it like this. So what you're doing, you just invert this chord. Okay, so now over the D flat you sit with F and B and E flat in your left hand, and then in your right hand you have B flat, E flat, and you have G. Okay, another way that you can go to that 3 there is, instead of playing that 4, you can actually go to the 7 by using the same tritone. Remember, we said there's 2 tritones that can be played, right, over the D flat, but that same tritone can be used over the G as well. Remember in the 7? So now you go back to the 7, but you play a different chord, because this chord sets you up to go to that 3. Sorry, yeah. So let's look at that different version. So for the left hand it remains F and B. The right hand changes to E and A flat, right? So there's different ways that you can play this chord. You can take it up, you can just play around with that E major chord over there, and then you go to the 3, which is C, and then over the 6 again you can play a tritone. Now sometimes people can play a diminished 7th chord, but instead of playing that, you can play the tritone over the 6. So now let's look at that 6. So that's over F, so now we make use of the flat 7 and the 3 of F, okay? So in the left hand it is E flat, and A right hand it is D and G flat, right? Or you can play it like this, right? Or like this. Yeah, let's use this one. Now you can extend the tritone by adding this note in there, which would be a sharp 5 that you add in there, right? Yeah, so sometimes people play the sharp 9, sharp 5 chord, right? And that is also a different way of, when you want to play a tritone as a passing chord, you can add that sharp 5 in there as well. So let's look at it at this time. So for the left hand it is E flat, A, and D flat. For the right hand it is A flat, D flat, and F, right? And then you can walk down okay, so that is just going down a whole step to B major, which is for the right hand G flat, B, and E flat, and then you play the same D flat major, just inverted down. Okay, so you can actually do this whole movement. Okay, and over the 2 you can do a tritone again. So let's look at that 2, which is B flat. Now we've already covered this, right? We have already covered this chord, which is just that C. Remember that one? So I'm not going to spend time to spell that out again. I've already showed you that chord, okay? And then the last one, we go to the 5. And on the 5, you can also play a tritone, but after you've played this, then you play the tritone to get back to the 1. So over that 5, let's look at the tritone. You can either play it like this. So for the left hand you have D flat and G. The right hand it is C, E, and G, and you play D to E grace note, right? So that would look something like this. Or like this, okay? Or you can play it here, just inverting the chord up, okay? So for the left hand it is G and D flat, right hand it is G, C, E, and G. Okay? So those are a few ways that you can play the tritone. So let's just see if we can review the whole section. So it was the 1, 7, 3, 6 to the 2, or, and then 5, 1, sorry, like that, or like that, or like that, right, or like that, and then we go to the 4, and we stay on that 4 for a tritone passing there, or the 7, and then we go to the 6, and then to the we go to the 3, sorry, and then we do a 6 passing tritone there, or this one, and then over the 2, and then over the 5, okay, and then back to the 1. Okay, so now let's look at the last one. That is just a slight variation from the 3, 6, 2, and then back to that 5. Okay, so the last move that we will look at is just a 3, 6 to that 2. We've already covered the 2. So instead of going to a minor to that 6, we do that sharp 5, sharp 9 again. No, that's not the case. This is a different chord. That's the 3 of C. Yeah, so I don't know what this chord is named, but let's just look at it. This is different to the minor version. So sometimes you do that is the turnaround move that you hear a lot, or just a different chord progression that people use. So that would be the C, which is the 3. So let's look at that chord. Now we're making use of the 3 and the flat 7 of C. Okay, so for the left hand it is E and B flat, the right hand is E flat and A flat, and over the 6. Okay, left hand, we've already covered this chord previously, but now this time we can throw in that grace note. So for the left hand it is E flat and A, right hand it is F, A flat and D flat, and then you play that grace note from E flat to F. Okay, so this time around you can play that same 2, but you can throw in that little movement in there. And you know, something that my friend Marco taught me was, I love that movement. You can throw that in there as well. Okay, so yeah, that is the entire lesson. I'll see if I can come up with more, but at this stage I believe that gives you a pretty good idea of how to incorporate the tritone if you haven't mastered the tritone yet. So feel free to ask questions at any time. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel or my email listing, where I can keep you posted on new lessons that I've done. So thanks for watching and have fun.